afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session. I also want to welcome all the speakers who are not from Calcutta, so a hearty welcome from Kolkata. As you have seen, they are very, very distinguished in their own fields, but today, though they've written much more broadly on a load of topics, we're really going to focus in on issues of identity, insider, outsider, and how that plays in the Indian political sphere today, and the impact it has on people's very personal everyday lives. So I'm going to ask a series of questions, and they're going to get a chance to speak, and we try to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions, though I will ask each of the speakers if they would like first to ask the other speakers a question before we open it to everybody. So all of you are writing about people on the Indian margins, or people who think they're at the center say they're at the margins. The margins keep shifting, depending if you're in Delhi, if you're in the state, or in your particular village. So they're very shifting targets. And these margins are based on ethnicity, geography, religion, caste, and gender, which you all show through your work. You are all bringing very critical attention to an integral part of our diverse histories, and about people and about communities about whose realities we know too little. I'm going to ask each of you first to speak about the personal and political compulsions that led you to write and compile your books and articles. Because, say, for example, these are wonderful books which I recommend to you, But I Am One of You, which is Stories from the Northeast, by Samrat and by Preeti. This Land We Call Home by Nusrat, who's a cinematographer, and her first non-fiction book. And Mr. Jha, whose book is not, I didn't have the opportunity to read, writes about Anglo-Indians in Maklaski-Ganj. So these are all communities which are integral to the country, but who often feel very marginalized. So I'm going to start with you, Samrat, and why you all chose to write this book about the Northeast.
Well, I grew up in Shillong in the 1980s and 90s, and those were troubled times in Shillong. And the issue of insider and outsider was very much a living daily reality. And we often had these riots between the local community, the Khasi, and people like us from other parts of the country who were known there as Dakhars, which means outsiders in the Khasi language. And so it was just a normal part of life there. And so that was, because it was a part of growing up, it was something that I had been interested in. But I left Shillong after my 12th and moved first to Baroda, Gujarat, Anand, and then Bombay, Delhi. Kind of distanced myself, forgot about what had been, troubles back home, disengaged. Then one day at a conference in Delhi, I bumped into Preeti, and who had an idea about a book on the Brahmaputra. And so I started going back to Northeast India to do my research and traveled extensively over there. And when I got back, I kind of ended up re-engaging with the issues there, because it so happened that the journeys that I was doing in Assam and Arunachal, but later on Assam, following the Brahmaputra, took me through the state at a time when the NRC was going on there. And so the issues of insider and outsider, even though they don't figure in my Brahmaputra book, which is a travelogue, but it was something which was just all around. And so that's where I kind of ended up re-engaging with the issue. And it remained a thing that this was something which had been, it was a three-generational reality in a certain sense, this issue of who belonged and who did not. Because my family, my grandparents were displaced by partition. And my father was a young man in Assam in the 1960s when the Bongal Khada agitation, drive out the Bongals, started in Assam. So he was driven out. And I had grown up with that same thing, and now I had gone back there many years on, and the same thing was still going on. So it was this that brought me to, to think about the issue again.
Thank you. Preeti, can you speak too?
Thank you. And it's really lovely to be here. So let me first say thank you to the festival team for getting us here to this lovely city, which I love even more every time I come here. So yeah, I mean, as Samrat said, this thing of being from a family that has gone through partition, there is something called intergenerational trauma, which is much in focus these days because a lot of people, young people, are writing about partition and what families went through at that time. I also come from one such family. My family came away from West Punjab, from a place called Apeejay, which you may have heard because it became terribly, terribly famous later. So, you constantly heard these stories when you were growing up, and my grandmother and my mother would both tell us stories about partition and how they had traveled to this side of Punjab and then consequently landed up. My grandfather found work in the state of Madhya Pradesh, central provinces as it used to be called at that time. So I think there's always been this thing about looking at a line and what does that line mean. So one day because this line is in a certain place, you are inside the line, and then one fine day, you're just outside it. And then you do not have a country, you do not have a home, you really don't belong. A lot of stories and, first-person accounts as well as fiction has been written about all of this. Famously, that story about Toba Tek Singh, for example, the mad lunatic person, because even lunatics were sent to the other side. If you were a Muslim or if you were a Hindu or a Sikh or whatever, you had to also be going to the other side. So it's that kind of lunacy that attracts you to find out that since we are all migrants in a sense, what is this greater idea? Is it nation building? What is it that impels this kind of, migration, forced or otherwise? So I think that's where it came from, this great interest. And then a lot of my travel in the Northeast, because obviously I don't belong there. Again, this is a non-belonger trying to find out what makes and how can I open this little window and look into another place and try and see, what are the ways in which we build these bridges with another culture and almost another country. So far is it in terms of, distance and all of that. So there were a lot of reasons why we've got together, and this is the second anthology because there was one before this called Insider Outsider, and then this is the second one. But I am one of you because it is really difficult, this struggle to belong to a nation.
Thank you so much. Nusrat?
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon. And also thank you for staying back and skipping lunch. So this land we call home is the story of, in many ways is a story of India, but I'm chronicling 4 generations of my family over a period of 100 years, say from late 1800s to about 2019. So the focus of the book and the reason why I set out to write it was a search of identity and a search for belonging in India as we know of it as the India of today. India which looks at its minorities with a very different lens. I mean, we had, when I was growing up, I'll trace back a little. So I grew up in a multicultural household where my maternal ancestors were Bhatus. Bhatus were original inhabitants of India at one time, but they were viewed with a lot of suspicion over the period of years, and specifically during the 1800s, post-1857 era, where the British started looking at everybody who was non-sedentary with a lot of suspicion. They wanted to sedentarize people. They wanted to also leverage on the already existing caste system in India. And Bhatus were outcasts. They didn't fit into this. They were nomads. They traveled. They had goats. They were dacoits as well. They had varied professions. A branch from Bhatus called Nuts. They're street performers. They were singers, dancers, makers of arts, crafts as we know of them today. So they were basically traveling the land. But when the post-1857 era came, the British felt the need to sedentarize them because they were also standing up against any kind of rules and regulations passed on by governments. So when this happened, the already existing caste gatekeeping in society, this process led to a certain event in my book, which I won't go into detail because that will be a spoiler, but it involved a fire. And after the fire, my great-grandfather, Hardayal Singh, decided to convert to Methodism. And in the book, of course, I speak of how this happened and who were the already placed players in this who were helping and evangelizing in the lands of northern India. So over the period of another period of maybe 2-3 decades, my grandmother decided to convert from Methodism to Catholicism. My mother decided to convert from Catholicism to Islam, and I'm married to a Hindu Bengali man. So this is in general India, right? This is not a unique story. This happens in many families, but now in the India of today, we hear the word conversion and we think of so many different things that may have happened. Rice bag, money bag, this jihad, that jihad, a lot of things. These are the words that come to you, but never the word agency, that somebody may have just felt the need and thought, I mean, we are all working towards things. We all want growth. If somebody thought, hey, this is better for me, I'm going to get respect, education, I will go for it. So these are the things that my book is talking about. Why did I feel the need to write it? Is because when I was growing up, I was aware of all the mixing of cultures, maternal side Christians, paternal side Muslims. We as children were still dabbling with both religions, finding our identity. And then the attacks started. In 1998, Graham Staines and his 2 minor sons were burnt to death. The most gruesome murder that kind of woke me up as a 18-year-old girl. And I started, and there were multiple that came before that, after that, church attacks, nuns being attacked. I have 2 maternal aunts who are nuns in the family. So I started questioning, why is this not working for India when it worked for our house? So I started questioning, looking into, started reading on Bhatus and found no information on Bhatus in India, nothing that was accessible. And specifically nothing of oral history looked at from a Bhatu person. So these were factors, and there were plenty of political factors that were propelling. When I was 13, the Babri Masjid was demolished. Suddenly, a 13-year-old Muslim, Hindu Muslim, half this, half that, suddenly became Muslim and was like looked at with a lot of interest from classmates. And I was growing up in Lucknow. So I was, interestingly, I grew up in a town that has never faced a communal riot, but during the Ayodhya issue, everything around Lucknow was burning, even Bombay was. So, I mean, I started dabbling with these things. I wanted answers, and at some point, when the CA and RC happened, these things became even more like, you know, like today, to be Muslim is not enough, to be Christian is not enough. Are you a fundamental Muslim? Are you a liberal Muslim? These questions, these tags are attached to your identity. So a lot of the writing of this land we call home was propelled from a personal understanding, as well as trying to put forward a point of view that many in India, especially driven by political forces, are missing.
So before we turn to Mr. Jha, can you hear me?
Hello.
Before we...
No. Nah.
Before we turn to Mr. Jha, I just wanted to say that these accounts, The Land We Call Home and But I Am One of You, are very historically intertwined texts. their personal histories, and even though Preeti is not an insider, she is actually an editor of this book, and the collection, the people who are writing are all insiders, very much. And you hear the human stories and how caste and ethnicity has torn people's lives apart. And I think that is really important and very important for us now to look at the madness of it all in today's world. Mr. Jha brings a different perspective because Mr. Jha actually writes about the Anglo-Indian community for this session. So yes. Can you speak about what brought you to talk about a community and your connection or lack of connection, and what compelled you to write about them?
Thank you, Jael. First of all, it's truly an honor to be present here with all of you at the Apeejay Calcutta Literary Festival 2025. And I will tell you, I have written a huge novel on Maklaski. This is a village in Jharkhand, Anglo-Indian village. This is the only village of Anglo-Indians in the world, I must say. And I spent long time and so many years during my research work. One day, one Miss Bonner was living there, from Anglo-Indian community. When I entered her house, it was a very beautiful house and a very, very beautiful garden. And there was a line on the floor, "Your home reflects you." And yes, we people like this land we call home. We always talk home. So that line on her entry floor, there was written, "Your home reflects you." I am, what the book is, I am,
but I am one of
but
you.
I am one of you. But I am one of you. This line is also from Anglo-Indian community. But I am one of you. And this land we call home. Because then I asked Miss Bonner so many questions. What is Anglo-Indian? She was very witty woman, woman. She told me, "Have you read the name of my house?" I said, "Yes, of course. What is there on the wall?" I said, "Bonner Bhavan." Then she replied, "This is Anglo-Indian. Bonner Bhavan. Bhavan is Hindi word and Bonner. So this is Anglo-Indian. That's why I could have named it Bonner Villa, Bonner Home, so many things, blah, blah. But I have deliberately gave the name of my house is Bonner Bhavan. But the issue is how we have adjusted them in our regular life, the Anglo-Indian community. And I am a journalist, an author. First of all, I went there as a journalist. And I visited the place. I met so many characters. And I thought that this is not just a 4 pages or 5 pages report for a magazine. This is a this is a theme of a big novel. And Jael, I traveled so many times to Maklaski. This is in Jharkhand. And 60 kilometers from Ranchi. Those days when I visited there, Bihar and Jharkhand was one. But in 2000, year 2000, Jharkhand was separated. So now this village is in Jharkhand state. So I want to say कि सबके साथ, because I have rights according to Miss Bonner, Bonner Bhavan. तो हम अंग्रेजी में भी बोलेगा, हम हिंदी में भी बोलेगा. Because I have written novel on Anglo-Indian community. And so मैं ये आपसे ये कहना चाहता हूँ, Lord Curzon ने once he said that God made Indians, Africans, so many, but we made Anglo-Indians. This is man-made community, not God-made. So, but the issue is the idea of belonging, as Jael introduced the subject, the idea of belonging is a very personal and political. love, survival, freedom, power, loss, identity, rights and duties. All these shape our sense of belonging as we experience life as a human being. And I believe these two books also voice this line, this thought. And our motherland, India, has always been known for its tolerant nature, as it has integrated small communities into the mainstream of its democracy. For instance, Indian Constitution provided for the nomination of 2 members from the Anglo-Indian community to the Lok Sabha. Remember, not Rajya Sabha. There was a provision, a nomination in Lok Sabha, 2-member parliament from Anglo-Indian community. But to the Lok Sabha to ensure they had a voice in politics. Without political power, no community can feel empowered. However, in 2020, a very sad aspect, in 2020, the Anglo-Indian community was deprived of this power when the nomination provision was abolished after so many years of the freedom of India. And this sudden change has left the community wondering if, Preeti, this is very sad point for Anglo-Indians, and they are very much agitated. But what they can do? They are very small community. So the sudden change has left the community wondering if a new culture is emerging in a country known for its unity in diversity. The Anglo-Indian community is shocked by this development. No nomination in Lok Sabha now, and no nomination in assemblies. हमारे ऑनरेबल मणिशंकर अय्यर साहब भी हमारे साथ पास ऑडियंस में हमें दिख रहे हैं. तो मतलब मणिशंकर अय्यर जी ज़्यादा बेहतर हैं, इतने बड़े मतलब ये स्टेट्समैन है एंड स्कॉलर हैं. तो ये जो फ्रीडम के बाद इमीडिएटली जब कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बना येल, प्रीति, तो ये प्रोवाइड किया गया था. ये अनेकता में एकता का इससे बड़ा प्रतीक क्या हो सकता है? और अपने देश के पार्लियामेंट में फिरोज रानी साहब फ्रॉम पारसी कम्युनिटी, या पीलू मोदी पारसी कम्युनिटी, कई पारसीज भी हाउस में थे, पार्लियामेंट में मेंबर थे. तो अगर आपका से नहीं है वहां पर तो यू फील वेरी वीक. और आज के डेट में 2020 में जब इसको बंद कर दिया गया तो आप सोच सकते हैं कि देश में हालत क्या है. दिस रेजेस क्वेश्चन अबाउट द लास्ट लाइन येल, this raises questions about the status of minorities in India today. India has a long history of tolerance and acceptance. The Armenian community, I have met so many people in Calcutta, Armenian community. And the Armenian community, for example, has settled in various parts of India and contributed significantly to fields like education, hospitality and business. Many Armenian families have lived in Calcutta and continue to so without any issue. मुश्किल क्या है? आज की तारीख में जो माइनॉरिटी या इस तरह की कम्युनिटी के बारे में हम बात करते हैं, चाहे वो पारसी हो, येल हमारी ज्यू कम्युनिटी से आती हैं. एक बार मैं बॉम्बे में नादरा से मिला था, नादरा एजिकल, द ग्रेट एक्ट्रेस ऑफ इंडियन सिनेमा. शी वाज सो सैड. तो माइनॉरिटीज का जो स्टेटस है अपनी कंट्री में जो पहले था वो गिरता जा रहा है जिस तरह से. दिस इज शॉकिंग और हम सभी इंडियंस को इस पर सोचना चाहिए. थैंक यू.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jha, and thank you for bringing up the issue of political representation and the lack of it today in so many communities. I'm going to now move backwards again, back to the Northeast. And in this wonderful set of stories that you've been able to put together with an incredible introduction that you've both written about the politics and the history, and also why the political compulsion that you wanted, that made you write the story to move beyond identity politics so that people could actually live in a nation and feel one. And nobody, no matter where, had to feel insider or outsider. We won't be able to go into all of the stories, but could each of you talk maybe about one or two of the stories where you delve into, where the writer delves into how their personal lives and regional conflicts confronted each other in ways that were most destructive for them as people and as for communities?
Okay. Actually, Manipur is the state which is at the center of a lot of this right now. A lot of things are happening there and have been happening for a while now. And so, in retrospect, it is those stories which have become most interesting and relevant from a reader's perspective, as detached as possible. The thing is that the book was actually thought of and conceived long before any of this happened, and the pieces had come in and been edited before any of the trouble started in Manipur. And looking back at it now, when we read it now, it becomes all the more interesting because we have, because people have been reduced, writers have been reduced, everybody has been reduced to their communities. And so we have a writer, as it happens, who is from the Kuki community of Manipur, one who is from the dominant Meitei community, and one from the Naga community. So these are the three main communities or major communities of the state of Manipur. And when I look at those stories now, it's so interesting because each of them, now they would probably be talking about different things if they wrote about their belonging or not belonging right now. At that point, just before the trouble started, actually both the Meitei writer and the Kuki writer wrote about somehow being not quite insiders within Manipur, not quite fully insiders within their own communities, because they were what in Bangla we call probashis. They had grown up somewhere else, not within the state of Manipur. And so, it's this sort of this layered nature of identity which comes out again and is so interesting, and how it shifts in a moment. Something happens and suddenly you're just reduced to a label, and that's all that remains.
One of the things that really struck me in the writing was the constant othering that people had to grapple with, and the psychic toll that it took on each of them. Not only the psychic toll, sort of how this has been a constant struggle in the Northeast for more than 150 years. And the way in which personal narrative and history was woven together was really very impressive to me. So Preeti, would you like to speak or maybe even read from one of the stories so that people have a sense of how moving each one of the writers are in this anthology?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not reading from any of the stories, but the couple of things that struck me when we were putting the anthology together and as the pieces started to come in and we talked to each other about them, one of the really strange things and frightening things is how everything is so much a mirror image, a reflection of the other. And this is not just in those, the states of the so-called Northeast. These are mirror images that we see in all our metro cities, in all our towns and even villages now, because whether it is divisions, whether it is this kind of hatred or misunderstanding of each other that is being fueled daily. And this is the part that really scares me, and this was the part that I think was reflected in each and every personal essay that came to us. And it especially speaks to me because I belong to a minority. It speaks to me. I am concerned about it because I am a Sikh. I have seen recent happenings in Punjab. I have seen the farmers at the doorsteps of Delhi. I know the kind of stuff that's happening. So these are not things that are very far away. They are actually all the pigeons that are coming home to roost. And each one of us has to confront it in our own ways. Being different is not to make the other person insecure. It is not to make the other person feel in any manner less or more. It, I think, calls for understanding, and it calls for being able to look at everybody with a certain amount of curiosity as well as empathy. And that, I think, is what this book tried to do. Because it is not to create fissures or to make them deeper. It was, as I think Samrat constantly says, truth and reconciliation, because you need to bring the stories out and to put them out there. And I'm bringing again and again this thing of being minority, because I first felt it in '84. Before that, I had never, ever thought of myself being a minority. I didn't have that kind of identity. I grew up in Madhya Pradesh, speaking Hindi. I mean, all my friends were there. Central India was my home. But somehow, in '84, there was a difference. And you did wear a label. And that label has not gone away.
Nusrat, you know, you took it historically, the agency that especially the women in your family, though it started with a man, took in terms of trying to escape the label of being part of a criminal tribe, I think, which is how the Bantus were labeled by the British. So can you talk about the toll that took, the psychic toll that took on members of your family over the ages? And yes, they were able to use the agency to overcome it, but what were the challenges in doing so?
So the baggage of carrying the Bhatu identity, I think in the process of beyonding, that is, you know, like leaving a lot and just going beyond just this feeling of wanting to belong, my great-grandparents had, I think, shed a lot of that layers, of those layerings behind. So when they did convert from being ex-criminal tribes to their newly minted Methodist identity, they were, as I've written in the book as well, they were weighing how much to keep and how much to leave behind and how much to mingle. So while they tried to conserve as much of the Bhatu language as they couldn't do much beyond that. So education for their 7 daughters came at the cost of losing a lot of their tribal identity, because progress and mingling in the mainstream involved learning English, and to get sucked in this whole process of gentrifying, they also were put into mission schools, which were boarding schools. So they quickly became very Anglo-Indian in their approach and very little Bhatu. So a lot of the Bhatuness was lost, unfortunately. And with their new Christian identity, they were also able to shed the caste baggage. But as I've written in the book as well, Indian Muslims and Indian Christians had very unknowingly or perhaps knowingly, just to maintain the balance of checks and balances and just keeping the caste order intact, they had also brought in a lot of casteness to their new identities. So while Reverend Hardayal Singh, my great-grandfather, who was once a Bhatu, and he joined a seminary in Bareilly, became a pastor, became a deacon, he spoke of caste rot within the Methodist order. So there was caste favoritism that was happening and withholding his good transfers. So at some point he resigned. He resigned from the ministry. And in my mother's new identity as a Muslim, when she married a Muslim man, because of that, I became caste privileged, because my Indian Muslims also follow caste order, and because I'm Shia and Ashna Shari, who follow the 12ers and also have a Sayyad identity, we became top of the order. So I can't say I grew up with caste, because unfortunately I had privilege. So for me to acknowledge the plight of Indian Muslims who are low on the caste order came up very late in during my graduation days in Delhi University, where I found myself questioning and telling my friends who were questioning me about caste orders in Islam, and I was like, no, but everyone's equal before God, as in Christianity, both being egalitarian religions, but they so conveniently brought in the caste order with them. So it was, I would say, it wasn't difficult for me personally. And the people who faced this, unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to meet.
Yes, but you talk about your mother's husband, your father, who came from a more aristocratic Muslim line. But your mother did face difficulties when she moved into that family, and she was also made to feel very much an outsider by her Christian family. And there was a lot of conflict that you talked about and what she had to go through with this constant shifting of identity. So maybe you could just speak a little bit about that, because it was, caste certainly played a huge role there too.
Yes.
Religion and caste,
Yes,
ethnicity.
yes. So while my mother had to face a lot of, like she was accepted, of course, but there was a lot of distance in that accepting. A lot of Indian Sayyid Muslims hold a lot of pride in their lineage. So my mother converted with all her heart, and she's a more zealous Muslim than anyone in the family, but she still is, she can never be all Muslim for some parts of the family. You know, like she's not Sayyid. And this is something that, I mean, I'm unafraid to acknowledge, because I think it's a very important discussion, this purity of lineage, the purity of nationality, if I may bring the conversation to that, because my holy land is not in India, so I can't be fully Indian for some people also. So this chasing of homogeneity that India insists on right now, that, oh, we have to be all pure. So that, of course, and in the microcosm of that, families have that as well. So like I said, my mother had to definitely face that. My father had to face, because he was not being accepted by my mother's grand aunts, who were once Bhatu, now Christian, because the horrors of partition were too close that time. So they viewed my father with suspicion as well. And like I said, I've never been fully anything in my life.
So I think you get a sense of the complexity of these stories, how they change with generation, how they change over time, how labeling mostly doesn't really work except to bring more divisions, and really the challenges of overcoming those divisions and identities to use your agency to try and craft better futures for yourself. Mr. Jha, you spoke about the loss of the Anglo-Indian political representation. But there have been many other losses that the Anglo-Indian community has also faced. Can you talk about some of the social, economic, and cultural losses that this community now has to grapple with? And what are some of the principal challenges that they face?
You know, as just now Nusrat has mentioned, the basic thing, the basic problem is existence and identity. In just two words, we can explain her issue, Samrat's issue, or the issue of Anglo-Indians. Yes, so many problems are there for Anglo-Indian community. First of all, as I have told you, that they have been deprived from nomination in Parliament or Assembly. Another, still we have, they feel that we have not accepted wholeheartedly this Anglo-Indian community in our Indian life. They are still a very Band Samaj, closed society, and they rarely interact with we all general Indians. They don't interact. I think there is a problem of trust. There is a problem of trust. They are never open wholeheartedly to other Indians. And I have been very close to this community, but still I feel that I am outsider. The issue is why they don't believe after such a long period, so many decades has passed. The trust is the issue. And in the country where they live, तो वहाँ problem है कि भाई trust का मसला है, and trust, existence, identity. One thing, finally I will tell you, Jael, that the survival, the existence and identity. When McCluskey-Ganj was dying in 80s, because this village, I touched this great land of Calcutta, that Mr. McCluskey, who established the village Preeti, McCluskey Ganj, Mr. McCluskey lived in Calcutta. His headquarters was in Calcutta. He was a real estate business he had, and he was member legislative council of Calcutta Assembly. So this is the great place where the idea of McCluskey Ganj emerged. Dr. Henry Gidney, Mr. A.S. Bauer, who they were living in Calcutta. They planned that we need a village in India because India is the land of villages. And when McCluskey Ganj was dying, I mentioned it to Preeti today in the morning, that Mr. Rosario, Alfred de Rosario, he runs a school in Patna, Don Bosco Academy. And he was MLA also in Bihar Assembly as a nominated member of Anglo-Indian. Mr. Rosario took a great step and he established a branch of Don Bosco Academy in McCluskey Ganj, Yale. Please, suniye isko. And Mr. Rosario established a branch of Don Bosco Academy, and he deliberately didn't put hostel facility with his school. And he said to the Anglo-Indian community living in McCluskey Ganj, he suggested that you people start hostel in your vacant house, big vacant house, because उनके बच्चे तो विदेश चले गए थे. वो old persons, they were living alone in their big house. So Mr. Rosario suggested that you people start a hostel, family cottage hostel style में. बच्चा आएगा, सब लोग आएगा, कुक रखा जाएगा हॉस्टल चलाने के लिए बच्चों का, तो जिंदगी लौट आएगी. और that saved McCluskey Ganj. McCluskey Ganj was like a phoenix bird who again emerged in life. So still today, Don Bosco Academy of McCluskey Ganj is there, great progress, and McCluskey Ganj is smiling, smiling and smiling. So the main basic thing is fight for your existence. If you lose your heart, you will lose yourself and lose the identity of your community.
Thank you, Mr. Jha. Actually, we from Calcutta are very familiar with Anglo-Indians and still have many Anglo-Indians with us today. Many of us here still go to Anglo-Indian schools, which have contributed enormously to the city. And when I was growing up, there were many Anglo-Indian girls in my class. So Calcutta has a very long and rich Anglo-Indian community history, rich community, and still many are very active today and very much part of us. I'm going to move now back to the northeast, so we're shifting all over India, and I hope that doesn't make you feel dizzy. But let me come back to Samrat and to Preeti and ask you to spend a little bit of time to share with the audience what were some of the major takeaways or discoveries you had. I know you know the Northeast, so there may not have been surprises, but what are some of the maybe surprises you had or the takeaways that you wanted to share about what is happening in the Northeast today and what you hope this book will contribute in terms of understanding this very long, difficult, violent history, which we are still facing in Manipur most dramatically right now?
Well, you know, a lot of what we've been talking about, and some things sort of come together in this, in a certain sense, because it is about, ultimately it is about the idea of a nation state and the idea of who is the authentic people of that nation state. And that imagination of empires and former empires or remnants of empires, because the imperial imagination is not a national imagination. And there is no authentic national people really in a diverse empire. There is a person of the emperor, there is or empress, but who has a certain background, whatever that might be. Although in the case of British India, the British Indian Empire, Queen Victoria, for example, was probably more German than English. But so the transition is what probably has been problematic, and that breaks down at different levels. So it may break down to the idea of what an India or a Pakistan or a Bangladesh ought to be. How does it accommodate its minorities? And it is a question that remains unanswered, and I don't see it being answered in any pleasant way, either here or in other places. The Middle East, I must mention Israel. And so I think that question, that is a difficulty, and we see it then breaking down even at subnational levels, at the levels of states. The state of Manipur, who is a Manipuri? Now, in the state of Manipur, the only people who call themselves Manipuris are the Meiteis, and probably only the Hindu Meiteis at that, because there are also Muslim Meiteis who are known as Pangals. And so it's a difficult one, because then you suddenly have this little, relatively speaking, within the vastness of India state. And you have different communities there, and then you have this whole former kingdom which is imagined or claimed as the territory of one community because the king belonged to that community, and they have a written history, so they claim, which goes back to 33 AD. And so you're claiming 2,000 years of history as a basis for claiming this entire land. And it's not a problem which can be solved with a territorial imagination of a nation state that is authentically owned by one community. So I think for me, that's the takeaway.
It's a bit of a depressing takeaway. It's one where you feel that resolution doesn't seem like possible, which is not one that is very reassuring for us as Indians. But Preeti?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the most interesting thing about this anthology and about basically people who are writing from a personal viewpoint, they're writing their own stories, they're writing something which is a slice of their lives. But it's amazing to see how that actually is a slice of the nation's life, and how a personal piece actually consolidates the narrative that we are either reading, seeing, you're seeing it on TV or seeing it on whatever media reports, or through other reportage that you might, be privy to. But how it is always the personal essay written by one person, because they are going through that thing that you say is a historical event, but then how does that impact one life? And through that one sees the kind of ripples that it is creating. So in this entire thing, this whole thing of the personal being political is actually really, really important. The second thing for me in this is this whole thing of unequal citizens. Who's equal, who's unequal? And when do you become unequal? Because again, to go back to partition, to go back to 84, to go to this part of the country, the Northeast, to go to so many other parts of this country now, and so many other communities in this country now, unequal citizens seem to be growing. So for me, that was a major takeaway, because in many ways it's prescient, because you can see what's happening. And I'm sorry, it is dark, dismal, but true.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Nusrat, this is going to be the last question, and then I'm going to have you ask each other questions and open it to the house. You did a lot of historical research about your family, and you intertwined your family's story with our Indian history, the larger, broader political events and historic events that were taking place. Can you comment on why you did this, why you saw this story of your family as an important part of a larger national narrative? And can you also comment and share a couple of the highlights where your family's history and the history of the nation intertwine?
So the book in general is written with the story of 4 generations of my family and the birth of India in many ways. So my mother was born in 1947, and so was India in so many ways as an independent nation. So as as a way to tell the story, because this is narrative nonfiction, I have told the story of my mother, her life, and how things were at different junctions in her life when India was going through its own political processes. This is also the story of nation and religions, because I think now, especially more than ever, all religion is political. So how identities are formed under the layer of religion, religious oppression, or religious freedom, whichever way we want to look at it. So when I was telling the story, I was looking at very deeply observing the making of the BJP. So when I didn't know this before I started writing, that the BJP came into existence as BJP, the BJP we know, it was in 1980, and I was born in the same month in 1980. So I found a few things to tell the story along the way, but it's also important because so many of these political, the processes, the way the BJP that we know of today was not formed in one day. It was formed over processes, over political movements that were happening, some very, very powerful things. I've mentioned the emergency in great detail because that directly affected my mother, who had to go and surreptitiously to give birth to her 5th child because she was scared that they'll give her a hysterectomy or something. So these are, and she almost died in that labor in the house. So these are very important retelling. And I also, the conclusion that I came to was that all, histories are intertwined, whether it's the nation or its people. So the history of its people makes the history of a nation. And I was telling the history of a very, very neglected community, Bhatus, and what happened to their descendants over many different years, decades of political outcomes or even social movements. And while I was writing, I also, the wonderful discovery that I made was that when I was speaking to my uncles and aunts, they always mentioned that they were Bhatu Rajputs. And this is their truth. But Bhatus are outcasts, Bhatus were notified communities, and Rajputs are Kshatriyas, they are pretty much upper caste. But caste is also not a single layer. Caste has many intersectionalities, many reasons why they call themselves Rajputs, because at some point they were part of Maharana Pratap Singh's army, and they were given this as a concession. So while Reverend Hardayal Singh spotted a Rajputi handlebar mustache, somebody in Uttar Pradesh can be killed for that if he's a lower caste and he's sporting that mustachio, just that mustachio. So these were things that I came to as revelatory, because processes in history called Rajputization, which are concessions, which is Rajputs, bringing in many other folds and communities under their umbrella. So this is a truth. It wasn't to be questioned, it was to be accepted, much like our identity. Identities have layers. And this obsession with purity is so futile at the end of the day, but we are all chasing it, we are all succumbing to it. So there's this little thing, I'm just taking one more minute, where I've mentioned that when I was very young, my sister and we were playing, and somebody came and asked my sister, another girl, another 8-year-old came and asked my sister, what is your religion? And she said, after thinking, she said, I think we are Hindus. And she said, no, you're not Hindus, your name is Muslim. So she said, then maybe we are Muslims. Many years later, my son was playing in a football field, and this was after school, and there were children of various localities in the area, and one of the girls came up to my son and said, what is your name? His name is Dylan. It's Dylan Jafri Roy. So it's very confusing for most people. So he said, I'm Muslim, I think. And she said, oh, you don't look Muslim. Are you converted? And he said, no, I'm not converted, my grandmother was. And he was privy to me writing the book, but I was shocked. The questions don't change. Questions will remain.
Yeah. So this notion of trying to label and box people, even when they can't be boxed, is an exercise in futility, but one which we take with great seriousness and continue with it. So we only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to open it to the floor rather than to you each asking questions. Any questions? Please, ma'am. Okay.
There's no question. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I come from Northeast, and I've been hearing Ms. Gill and Mr. Samrat. My father is from Assam, lower Assam, if you may say so. There is a place called Goalpara, Lakhipur, Dhubri, small districts. It's a royal family. The language is dying, as you said, in Bhatu is also dying. And I have faced this term, chinky, throughout my life. I grew up in Delhi, but even in Bangalore, the modern people still call me chinky, and I had to slap a guy once because I was buying alcohol in a shop, and there were two, I think they came from quite affluent family, they were well read, but they were behind me and they were talking among themselves saying that, oh, the chinks come here just for getting laid with us, make money, and they are bloody sluts. And that's what I heard, and I turned and slapped that man. And I said, do you know even what a chink means? It means Chinese. And I'm an Indian, more Indian than you can think of. So, fortunately or unfortunately, no matter how much we get qualified or Northeast is being open to the others, a lot of people still have these notions that, they're not a part of the country. So I think the family, it's the school, it's from the childhood, it's the family who should keep teaching people that it's the inclusiveness.
Yeah, well, this is something that many of the stories that we have in this anthology talk about, the feeling of outside, and similar kind of stories that you've narrated are actually in the book. So read it. I think it's going to be one that will, one that you'll truly understand and vibe with. Others questions? We have 3 minutes left, so we can do a question. And please say to who you want to raise the question with. Any other question? Yes, please go ahead, sir.
It's a small observation for Samrat, if he wishes to answer. You mentioned about the history of the communities over there and the minorities being subjugated and put to a lot of hardships. But what about the fact that, in all these places, there is a great sense of subnationalism also. They are coming into their own. And how much of effort was made by the minorities to mingle with the majority community over there? And, I'm saying in terms of, say, matrimony, say in terms of getting involved with so many of their activities, so as not to make, I think this is also part of the reason why it led to some sense of ghettoism on the part of the minorities. And the minorities were not united. For instance, in Assam, it was sometimes against the Biharis, sometimes against the Nepalis, sometimes against the Bengalis. So it meant that economically, the local community or the subnationals, whether it is the Bodos or the Karbis, feeling that, look, we are being subjected to so much of these things, and whatever we have, the low-hanging fruits are being taken by the outsiders. So an effort to mingle with them or to find out the reasons and then, try to live with them could have perhaps made a little difference. It's just an observation. Thank you.
Sir, I agree entirely, and I know that you know the place intimately, Mr. Chatterjee, being former Chief Secretary of Meghalaya. And so it is true that of course, there were, I think, these sort of boundaries that communities observed amongst each other, and they did not really interact, and so that led also to certain problems. Maybe it's also to some extent rooted in history, because after all, if you're talking specifically about, say, the Khasi Hills or Meghalaya, then the Garo Hills has a certain history, the Khasi Hills has some other history, and then there were so many different kingdoms within the Khasi kingdom, the Khasi Hills itself. And Shillong was not a part of that, because Shillong was British territory, whereas the rest of it was not. And so the process of integration into India itself, because the people who came in, the so-called outsiders, were brought in by the British, which continues to be an issue, for example, with the Dalit Sikh community and whether they can occupy a certain part of the city. And so it is to, in many ways, in small and big ways, rooted in history. And I don't know how to, how it can be disentangled. And it is something that, taking it away from the Northeast and the specificities, I've observed in different parts of India, as I'm sure you have also. For example, in Bangalore, there was the Kannad Rakshana Vedike. In Bombay, there was the Shiv Sena, which took turns first against the South Indians, then against the North Indians, then against the Biharis, and finally against the Muslims. So political entrepreneurship lends itself to, I think, this kind of politics. And it continues to yield rich electoral dividends.
Just want to thank this wonderful set of writers and speakers for bringing to us this really important topic. And thank you to Apeejay and Anjum for having us here. And I suggest that you would read these books. I found them truly moving, important, accessible, and one that's really, really important and relevant in the India of today. Thank you, everybody.